The first reading from the Acts of the Apostles tells a story. It's like a story that we might tell in our family or like to hear in our family over and over again. And come to think of it, this is one of our family stories. It's a story of our extended family, the Catholic Church. This particular story goes way back. The Apostle Paul, at that time he was just becoming an apostle, went from being a persecutor of Christians to becoming part of the church and working with the members of the church. To place this on your historical timeline, this is before any of the books of the New Testament were written. Remember, most of the New Testament is composed of the letters of Paul, or the epistles as they're called, and the Gospels were written later. So none of it was written down. Yet the church, our church, existed. And what a great moment this was in our history. When Paul began to work with the other apostles and disciples and prepared to go on his great missionary journeys that saved so many people. Why was Paul so successful? The secret is the reason we have the church today. The same church we read about in Acts. It's the presence of Jesus through the Holy Spirit. In the second reading, St. John writes, "And his commandment," that is the commandment of God the Father, "and his commandment is this, we should believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another just as he commanded us. Those who keep his commandments remain in him, and he in them. And the way we know that he remains in us is from the Spirit he gave us." It was Paul's love for Jesus and the guidance of the Holy Spirit that spurred him on. St. John tells us in this passage I just read that the same Spirit is available to us. He speaks to us individually so we can know that we're on the right track and following the commandments. But he also speaks collectively to the entire church. And this is recorded in the Gospel of John in chapter 16, verse 13, when Jesus, speaking at the Last Supper to the apostles, says, "When he comes, the Spirit of truth, he will guide you to all truth." This promise has to be to the entire church because it can't be to individuals, because individuals can go off in any kind of crazy direction. And speaking of going off in a crazy direction, we find that we have today atheists or humanists who think that they can lead good lives apart from Jesus. Well, in the gospel, he says something to them and to us. "I am the vine, and you are the branches. Whoever remains in me and I in him will bear much fruit, because without me you can do nothing." Now maybe these people do live what seems to be a good life. If so, then without them realizing it, they are following Christ and his commandment to love one another. Back to the second reading. "And his commandment is this, we should believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another just as he commanded us." They may not have the belief, but if they are truly loving one another, they're more Christian than they realize. Now, they're consciously rejecting Jesus, not believing in him, but this is offset by them loving other people. So maybe God will have mercy on them, maybe. But they probably have other moral problems that they're not owning up to, because if we don't open ourselves to God and hold ourselves to God's standards, we tend to be kind of easy on ourselves. Well, what about Christians or Catholics who don't go to church, who exclude themselves from our church family? What about them? We probably all know someone. They might say, "Oh, they're all too corrupt or too hypocritical or too whatever. Well, it's a similar story, I would say, with the atheists, that if they're truly loving one another, that's something in their favor. But as Christians or Catholics, they should know better. Jesus says in the gospel, anyone who does not remain in me will be thrown out like a branch and wither. People will gather them and throw them into a fire, and they will be burned. Am I saying that these people are going to go to hell? I'm not saying that, but I am saying that they're risking it. And the sad part is they probably don't realize that they're risking it. You know, that really tugs at my heartstrings. Maybe it does yours as well. You think back to St. Paul in that first reading. God worked powerfully in his life. Probably no Christian today would make himself or herself equal to Paul. But was he a lone wolf? No. He went and he found the church and worked with the disciples and members of the church through the church for all that he did. And that's the same church we have today, the Catholic Church. Yes, it has its flaws. You know, the first reading speaks of the church being at peace, and we may sentimentalize and think, oh, it was all so wonderful then. Well, this is chapter 9 of Acts, and a little earlier in chapter 6 of Acts, it's reported that there was a big problem because the Greek-speaking widows were not being cared for. So the apostles had to appoint helpers or deacons to take care of those women. And then later on, Paul documents in his letter to the Galatians that Peter, when he was at Antioch, he would eat with the Gentile Christians. But then some Jewish Christians came to Antioch, and Peter stopped eating with the Gentiles. Apparently, he was afraid of what the Jewish Christians would think of him. So the church has had problems from the beginning, and it has problems today. But by remaining throughout the past 2,000 years in Jesus, with the other adopted brothers and sisters in him, under the guidance of the Holy Spirit, the church has continued to proclaim the gospel and save souls.